Morning, everybody. Bear with me, the dog decided to just start barking right now. In this week's Torah portion, Beshalach, we read Shirat Hayam, the Song of the Sea. After the Israelites crossed the sea in celebration, Miriam, using her timbrels, leads the women in song and dance. Hold on, I'm gonna go get her.
It happens to the best of us.
Sorry about that. I found it odd that if Miriam and the rest of the Israelites were running from the Egyptians in this story, why did they have musical instruments with them? If you can only carry so much, even something as small and light as a tambourine takes up valuable space. In the Midrash, Mechilta 1084 explains that the Israelites knew God would perform miracles while on the way to the promised land, and the women were prepared to celebrate these miracles. Just goes to show that overpacking can be a good thing, especially when going on a long trip. Like Miriam, music and dancing were an important part of Claire's life. Claire would lead the U.S. choirs in dancing during Kabbalat Shabbat services whenever she was there. Mark also fondly shared with me that he remembers staying up late on New Year's Eve to record the top 100 songs of the year on a tape recorder, something none of our participants will ever experience. Most importantly, though, Mark would like to believe that if Claire were alive today, Claire would be spending time at the piano, singing and dancing with her grandchildren, just as Miriam sang with the Israelites. And that is not the only miracle we learn about in this week's portion. We're also introduced to manna, the food that the Jews ate during their 40 years in the desert. Although manna appears the same for everybody and spoils at night, there are two different miracles attached to it. One is that for every person, it tastes different, like their favorite food. The second is that on Friday night, as we welcome Shabbat, the manna will not spoil and the Israelites will have food for 2 days. Another miracle we're experiencing today is the ability to gather together on Zoom and celebrate Claire Sodden Memorial Weekend during the pandemic. While we cannot be together this year in person for Claire Sodden Memorial Weekend, I hope that through our activities we have planned, we'll be able to share her love of Judaism with each other, even though we are separated by almost 100 miles from Bel Air, Maryland to Herndon, Virginia, and even further out to Colorado. Before I finish, I would like to mention that we're honoring Mark Sodden with the first Aliyah this morning. One blessing to this pandemic is that despite physically leaving our community years ago, he's able to be here with us this morning as we honor and remember his big sister. Mark was just a preteen when Claire passed away, but through stories told by his family, our teens, and his own memories, I hope he sees her memory live on and thrive in others as much as I do. Thank you for joining us this morning.
By saying we're going down a rabbit hole here, but just bear with me. It will all come together by the end and make some sense, I hope. So as I was reading this through this week's Haftorah, Judges chapter 4, verse 4 through 5, chapter 5, verse 31, I was having some issues relating it to me personally, but I found a way to connect with it through current events. In this week's Haftorah, we learn about Deborah, the one and only female judge who is revered to be like a prophetess. 1, I'm not a female. 2, I'm not a leader of a nation. And 3, I'm nowhere near a prophet. But back to the Haftorah. Deborah is leading the Israelites through during a time of war with the Canaanites under King Jabin's rule. Later on in the Haftorah, we are introduced to Yael, an Israelite and general Sisera of the Canaanites. Yael takes a hammer and a tent nail to Sisera's head, and it's definitely not a pretty sight. Again, I can't relate to that, really haven't committed a murder that I know of, but so you'll see kind of what I mean here when I say this is hard for me to relate to my personal life. So I'm going to talk about some current events instead. 10 days ago, the US held an inauguration ceremony for a new administration. A member of this administration is 1, a female, 2, first female to hold this position, 3, technically a leader of this nation, and 4, leading our nation through trying and difficult times. I'm of course talking about Vice President Kamala Harris. Like Deborah, Vice President Harris is the first female leader of this nation. This administration is tasked with healing a divided country and just healing our nation during a time of a pandemic. So there's a lot on their plate. We, the people, are looking towards this administration for guidance during these times, just as the people of Israel were looking towards Deborah for guidance during the war. This week at Beth Israel, we are honoring and remembering Claire Sodden. For as long as I can remember, I have heard her story of how she was a guiding figure and a beacon of light for the synagogue, especially within the USY chapter. For 47 years, we have been honoring her and celebrating her life the one way we know how, with Ruach and friends. Like Deborah, like Kamala, Claire was a leader, and her impact has been felt for the past 47 years and more to come. Shabbat Shalom.
My name is Hannah Silton, and I'm your 2020-2021 BIOM USY President. I'd like to welcome all our participants for coming to the 47th Annual Claire Sodden Memorial Weekend, and I would like to thank Becca Rosenfeld, our Beth Israel USY advisor, for making us all come together, even in such a crazy time. I could not have done it without her. It is an honor to be able to talk about the wonderful young woman who was and still is such an inspiration to many of us here today. As many of you know, Claire Sodden was a very strong-hearted young woman who was heavily involved in USY. She was a kind and encouraging person, and everyone around her loved her. She was courageous and was not afraid to speak up and voice her opinion. Claire was a dedicated member of Beth Israel, having graduated from our religious school and going to services every week. She furthered her Jewish education by attending the Baltimore Hebrew High School and college. Claire was a role model and what many USYers strive to be. Sadly, Claire's life was cut short right before her 20th birthday due to complications of ovarian cancer. The loss of such an inspiring young woman was incredibly hard for the entire community, especially to all the USYers who had built a family with her. The following year, the teens of Beth Israel wanted to remember Claire the way she would have wanted, a weekend of fun, friends, and lots of ruach. Despite the current events and being in a virtual environment, we have kept this tradition alive with Shabbat services and virtual activities for the remainder of Shabbat and throughout the evening. This and the activities we have done previously in the year and most likely for the rest of the year have shown that while our faith has been challenged, through it all we kept moving forward, just as the Israelites did as they walked through the parted Red Sea on dry land. Luckily, we have only had to face our own inner struggles, unlike the Israelites that were being chased by the Egyptians, as we just read about in this week's Parsha. This past week on Wednesday marked the 75th anniversary of the liberation of the Auschwitz concentration camp. From those that survived the horrible events of Auschwitz or any concentration camp, and through those that sadly did not, we can learn that we must continue to persevere and that we are and will continue to build a new future together. Growing up, I have been the only observant Jew in my school in Harford County. USY provided me with the opportunity to meet other Jewish teens, not limited to Baltimore, but across the Seaboard region, as I have participated in both regional and chapter events. My first USY event was a Claire Sodden weekend. I remember all the songs we sang and the new people that I met, and I wanted to have more experiences like this because I enjoyed being around other Jewish teens that were looking forward to be involved while having fun. After a year and a half of USY, I was elected as Religious Education Vice President for 2 years during my 10th and 11th grades. This prepared me to be ready to step up for president this year. I was reluctant to step up into any kind of leader position, like what Moses was when he was chosen to lead the Jewish people out of Egypt. Although I do not believe I have done near the job Moses did in leading, I am glad that I also heeded the call. This year was not what I was expecting for my final year of USY. As president, I had hoped to increase chapter participation and increase the activities available to Jewish teens at the synagogue. I was hoping to pull other members of our chapter to regional conventions with me, as I always found it nice to know that there were other teens like me. I met one of my best friends who I now talk to daily at the second convention I attended, and I wanted others to be able to have the opportunity to find and create new friendships just as I have. With the COVID pandemic limiting in-person events, I, with loads of Becca's help, have tried our best to keep the chapter active and create ways in which we could still do activities. We had our kickoff event to start the year with a fun movie and just being able to see friends after such a long time, Jeopardy night, and of course today. As it gets warmer, we are hoping to expand to outside events. I hope that my efforts will provide a foundation for those that are growing up in Beth Israel behind me, just as Claire Sodden's efforts laid the foundation for me and my peers. I will bring what I have learned as a member and leader of BIOM USY with me to college to contribute to my campus Hillel and eventually the larger Jewish community, just as Claire did and would have done. Thank you to all the USYers from Biome and around the region that have joined us today and helped the service come together. Thank you also to all the congregants that continue to show up despite the circumstances. And a special thank you to Mark, Claire's younger brother, for joining us today. As I celebrate my final Claire Sodden Memorial Weekend with all of you, I look forward to what the future holds for us all. Shabbat Shalom.